Hello and welcome to the Unnamed Automotive Podcast. My name is Sami Assad, and with me as always is my good friend and fellow automotive journalist, Benjamin Hunting. Say hi to the people, Ben.
Greetings, human listeners.
Greetings to everyone. If this is the first time you're listening to our podcast, thank you for trying something new. I will reiterate, Ben and I are a pair of automotive journalists, but more important than that, we are extremely good friends. Isn't that right, Ben?
Friendship is magic.
And hard to measure, to be honest. Ben is able to take over the podcast whenever I have a stroke mid-sentence. So Ben, I'm gonna hand it over to you so that you can tell our listeners where you can find your latest work.
You can find my work at Haggerty, at Motor Trend, and at Capital One.
And you can find my work at autotrader.ca, driving.ca, and Electric Autonomy Canada.
Totally a real website, not a government agency. Just do not feel the need to use an incognito browser window to read Sami's work on Electric Autonomy Canada. You will not be tracked to your home and identified numerically.
Hey man, I love my electric autonomy. That's great.
If you didn't say that, you'd have a lot to worry about.
Ben, we've got some pretty cool cars to talk about this week. I want you to take the lead because you're driving something with 8 cylinders, because that's kind of rare these days.
I mean, it's rare outside the luxury segment or the pickup truck segment.
Yeah.
Although there are fewer and fewer trucks that have V8s. It's a good point. I spent a week driving the 2024 Ford Mustang GT, and that is the new generation. I believe it's the S650. Is that what they call it, Sami?
The chassis code, I suppose. It must be S650. What do those numbers mean these days?
It doesn't really mean anything, but the previous Mustang was the 550, and I think that Ford has always done this thing where they kind of update the Mustang platform, but not completely. Mm-hmm. And this is one of those instances where there are a lot of changes, but it's not like a clean sheet kind of thing.
Okay.
They've
done that so many times. I think they did that with the not the last generation one, but the one prior to that.
Well, and in the 90s too, the Mustang, the 94 Mustang, when they replaced the Fox body, I believe the SN95, I believe was the chassis code.
Okay.
It was kind of, it wasn't called Fox 4. It had Fox Plus, something like that internally, because they took some aspects of the Fox platform and brought them over. But when they went to production, it ended up only very, very few things were shared in the suspension between those two cars. But S550 and S650, I think there's a lot more sharing going on. The real difference for this car, though, is I think the size, the technology, and the overall performance. The version of the car I had had a 6-speed manual and a 5-liter V8. You can also get the 10-speed automatic, and that is by far the fastest version of this car. Sami, are you ready for how fast the Mustang GT is in a straight line these days? What's your guess on 0 to 60?
4.5 seconds.
3.9.
What?
And I've actually seen some tests say 3.7.
Hold on. Is this that's the Mustang GT and not the hardcore dark horse thing?
That's the Mustang GT, and that's the Mustang GT with the 10-speed automatic.
Okay.
If you wanted to, the hardcore dark horse thing you're talking about doesn't really have much more horsepower. I think it's something like 18 horses or 14 horses more, because the Mustang as it stands now, it has 486 horsepower and 418 pound-feet of torque if you get the performance exhaust option.
Yes.
I think without performance exhaust, it's 480. And if you look at the Dark Horse has 500 horsepower and the same amount of torque, 418 pound-feet.
Okay.
The reason the Dark Horse is different, I mean, the reason you would want a Dark Horse from a drivetrain perspective is because they strengthen up the internal rotating assembly of that vehicle so that it can have the power is pushed up higher in the power band, and it's a little more resistant to the stresses that you would counter on a racetrack.
Now, Joel, last year I drove the 2024 Ford Mustang, this generation S650, SN650?
S650.
S650. I drove the EcoBoost convertible and a 8-cylinder coupe, but I did not drive the Dark Horse.
Do you want to be even more depressed?
Why?
What's the 0 to 60 of an EcoBoost?
6 seconds. 6.5 seconds.
4.9.
Holy moly.
Just under 5. And that's
okay. Sorry,
that's
I was inflating that number. That's more like my FRS 0 to 60 is like 7 and 8.
Again, that's
with
the 10-speed automatic, which is standard on all the EcoBoost cars now.
Okay.
Because then there's a launch control system in the car that I had as well. It actually worked really well. I was super impressed at how well it managed traction off the line. Sometimes with the manual car, the launch control systems, I don't know. You really have to finesse them and figure out how to work with them in order to get them work to give you the proper launch. But with the Mustang GT, the first time I used it, I had almost zero wheel spin and an incredible launch off the line. So
wicked.
That is something that it does very well.
Okay, so then, well, you know what? I want to talk about this. I want to talk about this particular thing. Like, launch control is one thing to talk about. There's other like gimmicks in the all-wheel drive. In the manual models, like no lift shift.
Yes, which I did use a couple of times. But so for those who aren't familiar, no lift shift is a feature where you just keep your right foot pinned to the floor. And then you use the clutch normally like you would while you're shifting gears, but you don't lift off the throttle, hence the name. Yeah. And the computer interrupts fuel delivery so that you don't do crazy stuff to the drivetrain while this is happening. It takes a lot of getting used. This has been around a long time. I think that, there was...
I remember Chevy Cruze, not Chevy Cruze, Cobalt SS.
Yeah, the
maybe
Cobalt
was one
SS
of the first cars with it.
In the mid 2000s was a feature that they had, but it challenges everything you've learned about how to shift a car. Yeah. And it also, if you have any kind of mechanical sympathy at all inside of you, you're constantly worried that you're going to break something. It just feels wrong to do. So I tried it a couple of times and then I never used it again.
And then there's also like a rev matching downshift feature, which also has been around for a while.
Yeah, which I never used.
So, these are all these like... And then in addition to that, there's also a feature, I think, in the... I don't know if it's... Because I only experienced in the EcoBoost models.
Okay.
But there was like this drift stick button or something like that, where you would... No. It had an electronic drift brake, which is applied similarly to a handbrake. Essentially, you lift the lever and then put it back down, I suppose, and it acts like a
a hydraulic handbrake of some kind. I did not notice. I don't think, unless that feature is standard with the car.
I think it's performance package model.
Okay, I did not have a performance pack. So the performance pack that you mentioned, you get bigger brakes, you get a Torsen limited slip rear, you get MagneRide. I think MagneRide is also maybe available as an a la carte option. My car did not have that. My car was a performance pack. Yeah, it includes those things. You can get those a la carte. I did not have a performance pack on my car. It was essentially I think a GT Premium, so it had some of the niceties inside the cabin. But the one performance feature it did have in addition was active exhaust. So there was a screen where you can choose 4 different settings for the exhaust system. The quiet one, which is super quiet. And in fact, you can set the car up to have a quiet start as well.
I love that.
And then there's the normal setting, which sounds, V8-ish. There's a sports setting, which is pretty loud. And then there's a race setting. And the race setting, it puts like track use only on the dashboard. And it is louder than sport. I don't know how to quantify how much louder, but it is certainly quite loud. Like to the point where my wife was pointing out how loud the car was, and she rides in a lot of my very loud cars. So if she's noticing it, it definitely is something that your neighbors
Why is it
notice.
track use only?
Because it probably is not street legal in terms of decibels.
Interesting.
That would be my guess.
Okay. So it's all these like weird gimmicks, and I think those like weirdness like extends to the...
I don't know. Are they weird though? What makes them weird? The handbrake thing, yeah. But the other things, I don't know if they're weird.
Do you need can't you be launch control? Do you need no lift shift or rev matching downshift?
I could be launch control,
stick?
But the problem with making me launch control is that if you want to advertise a 0 to 60 number and you don't have an automatic transmission, it's really hard to hit that exact number with a driver who's not used to it.
Get good. That's all I'm saying.
But then that same driver shows up at the dealership and is like, I'm slower than my friend's Camaro. I want to return this car, and you have an uncomfortable conversation.
And then when you jump into the interior of the vehicle, this is the other element that is super like modern to me, and not as like to me those like little applications, those little things that they're modern. Like I think that's the best way to describe it. That's the easiest way to describe it. But they're like gimmicky. They take away from like the old school charm that maybe the Mustang used to have.
Okay, you want to talk old school charm. This is a vehicle that no longer has a gauge cluster.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
It just has a rectangular slab of plastic. So my feelings about rectangular slabs of plastic are well known on this podcast. I think that if you have a vehicle's interior, it should look as good when the car is off as when it's on.
Yep.
And if everything is a screen, that is impossible because you just end up with a slab of black looking at you, reflecting all sorts of stuff. It's just not an attractive thing. Ford has gone out of its way to try and make you forget that this has happened by creating a fairly high level of customization for what the gauge cluster looks like. So you get, there's drive modes to the car, obviously. I talked about the exhaust having sport and race settings. There's also drive modes for sport and race. There is a slippery drive mode. There's a drag sport mode. And I think that the drag sport mode, in particular, if you have the Magna Ride, actually changes how the suspension reacts when you launch. So you can dig a little bit better. On my, fixed spring car, it probably didn't, and fixed shock car, it probably didn't do anything. But, in addition to those modes, there's 3 other modes, including a brand new one that was unlocked while I was driving. So there's a 60s Mustang dashboard that looks very much like you'd expect it to look. There's an 80s Fox body dashboard that has the traditional green and whatever look of the original illumination that you would have had in the 80s. And the same kind of style of tachometer and speedometer. And then on August 17th, Ford issued an over-the-air update for the car, and my car installed it while I was parked, and I came back in, and it's like, hey, do you want to read about what this brings to the car? And I'm like, okay. So I start reading, and it's just like stability improvements and all this stuff for the software. And I quickly got very bored, and I X'd out of that screen. And then I was driving with my dad and I was trying to show him the different dashboards. And I got to the Fox one and I saw there was an additional one that wasn't there the day before. And I chose it, and it's like the early 2000s SVT dashboard with like the white face gauges. And it was pretty cool. And honestly, this is a gimmick that I'm into because as much as I dislike the fake lack of gauge cluster, I do like Ford doing whatever it can to make you forget it's there.
Exactly. I mean, the point, if you're going to make this a digital screen, do something with it. I've always said that about like when an automaker puts push button gear selectors and doesn't do anything with the space that they've changed, right? Like usually you can put more storage space or more buttons or something like that where the gear selector used to be, and now they just made it that a hard plastic or an extra like cup holder or something like that. Yeah. So at least if you're going to give us a digital gauge cluster, let it be fun and different and totally customizable based on how you feel. I didn't know this about the 60s one though. See, when I drove it, all they had was the Fox body one. So that 60s model came, I think, in April is what my research is telling me.
It's pretty cool.
And it's super cool. First of all, I thought I had the idea that they were going to be updating it, but I also believe that like video games, they would be selling these like as microtransactions.
That's exactly what I was going to mention. And we talk so much about subscriptions in modern cars and how everyone hates the fact that features are becoming subscriptions that you have to pay for on a regular basis, or suddenly you lose your heated seats or whatever it is. So the idea that Ford is giving away these cool expansion packs is kind of runs counter to the narrative that has taken over the discussion of downloadable content.
And I love that. I mean, I don't know how long they're going to be planning to update it.
Like maybe they're just going to give it to us now and then take it away unless we pay for it a year later. I don't know.
No, I would imagine maybe that when the next model year comes, I'm curious to know if they'll continue updating the previous one. Do you just get it during that? Or when the next generation, if there is a next generation Mustang, which is even more dire to think about, like when Ford decides that a Mustang is no longer a viable product.
What are you talking about? It's their second most viable product, to the point where they gave us an electric version, Sami.
Yeah, that's fair.
Speaking of the electric version, I want to point this out. I mentioned this to Sami while I was driving it, but every time you choose one of these drive modes to get a different gauge cluster, you can separate it so you can just choose the one you want, or you can tie it to drive mode. It's up to you. But when you get to the race mode, the fuel gauge on the other types of gauge clusters. It shows you like a normal gauge like you'd expect, and then it has a mileage readout underneath telling you how far you can go on that amount of fuel. But when you get to the race one, and it just shows you a percentage of fuel, it's like 55%. And when I look at that, my first thought is like, oh, this is a shout out to the Mach-E, where it's like 55% battery. Like, because I never really think of a gas tank as being 55% full, like half full, quarter full, 3/4 full, but never like 60% full. So that was kind of funny.
So to me, it's like, it's really cool to see them adopt the possibilities that are present with the digital gauge cluster. I would love to see this in other areas of the vehicle. Maybe, I know like infotainment systems can't look like old, can they? I don't know. Yeah,
I don't know what that would be like. Is it just you go back to the 60s and your infotainment system just shows like a blank piece of metal?
Yeah, a cassette deck that you can't really interact with.
And then in the 80s for the Fox body one, it's like vinyl that's cracking in the sun. And then in the 90s, it's like,
based on the mileage of the vehicle, it should have some sort of
deteriorates. It's like a living image.
The wallpaper should change. I think that'd be cool.
The other thing I was thinking is, the proliferation of screens across every segment. But when you're in a performance car, I think that, especially one that has heritage like the Mustang, I do think it's a little sad to move away from an actual binnacle protecting the gauge. Like it's, I don't know, you're keeping the manual transmission, right? But you're getting rid of this other aspect of the heritage. And who makes that decision? I'm assuming it's a bean counter who says we don't have to make a fully formed dash anymore. We can just put a slab on top of it, a screen, and screens are cheap, and that's great, but it does lose some of the mystique.
Well, you mentioned like track capabilities of the vehicle, or that it has a race mode that might be oriented for the track. But the old school bins usually have like a little hood on them so that they provide a little bit of like protection from sun glare, I think.
Yeah.
And screens don't have that.
No.
And
they rely on brightness, I think. Right? They rely entirely on brightness.
I don't know if that's an appropriate response. I don't think that works the same.
So I have had a handful of cars where the infotainment screen washed out in the sun. BMW, in particular, I can remember having problems. And of course, there's also the glare coming from the Swarovski crystals.
Yeah,
that will catch you in the wrong.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah. I don't remember the glare of the screen, but I remember being blinded by the crystal on the track. What the hell is going on here?
But this Mustang did not have a sunroof, so there was no light coming in other than through the windshield. I didn't have any problems with that.
And if I remember correctly, the Camaro solves this one by having the smallest windows in the world.
and almost no glass. That's their.
And then tilting the infotainment system downwards, if I remember correctly.
So you know how Volvo made that crossover that had no rear window?
Yeah.
The Camaro designers must have been so jealous. They must have looked at that and said, "Oh, why not us?
Why couldn't we pull that off?" But talk to me about the visibility of this vehicle, because I think if you looked at it kind of quickly, you can see a little bit of Camaro-ish profile with the Mustang.
It doesn't feel like a pillbox. It's actually really for as long as you're riding in the front, you're not going to get any claustrophobia in the car. In fact, this vehicle felt a lot larger than I was prepared for, and it was the thing that caught me off guard the most often while I was driving it. And so there's a lot of Mustang.
What do you think that means? It can't be that much bigger than the outgoing model, is it?
I don't know. I mean, we could check.
Nah.
I don't know exactly from the outgoing model, but there's a lot of Mustang fandom in my family, and both my father and my brother-in-law showed up at my place with my dad has a couple of Mustangs. He brought his 2006 GT convertible.
Right.
And then
Hold on, I didn't know your dad had a 2006 convertible.
Yeah, he has that, and he has the 05 GT as a track car.
Your dad's so cool.
And my brother-in-law showed up with his 2012 Boss 302.
Yeah.
And
that's a machine, man. I'm into that. I love that thing.
My test car was yellow, but his Boss was that much more yellow. He had the Little Bus yellow version. There's a couple of other things we forgot to mention, Sammy. There's line lock on the car as well.
Oh God, yeah.
Control, which I did not use. Anyway, so the reason I'm mentioning these cars is because they are considerably smaller than the new Mustang, and that generation is 10 years ago, or I guess a little more than 10 years ago now. So the car has gotten quite large. When you're inside the car, the hood kind of rises up in an arch and then fades down again, so you can't really see the front of the car, but you do get this sensation that you're behind this big, like, I don't know, expanse of steel that's in front of you. And the car doesn't really feel large behind you in the same way that a Corvette does, but it does feel wide. The cabin especially feels roomy. And when I was driving it, it doesn't have a classic sports car feel wherein you're completely connected through the driving experience to the vehicle and you kind of become one with the vehicle and how you interact with it. Mm-hmm. I think that the size and the weight of the car interferes with that ability. Even though it is quite fast and the handling is good, it doesn't have the same kind of personality as a traditional sports car. And I think that's okay because it is a muscle car. You know, it should have its own flavor.
But this is the thing. It's like modern cars are trying to do a million things at once. I mean, we've got SUVs that are trying to be performance cars. We have compact cars that are trying to be performance cars as well. I think it's okay for a Mustang to appeal to a performance metric, right? Or to a performance benchmark. I think that's okay.
Yeah, of
course.
Whether
or not it achieves that is a whole other story.
No, I think it does. But again, I agree with you. I think it's good that it's different. And acceleration is a perfect example. So if you are hammering it hard and just you're really, let's say you're trying to lay down a good 0 to 60 time, or you're at the drag strip and you hammer this car hard through the gears. It is a violent explosion of power with each gear shift. And when I mean violent, not in an out of control way, not like the rear end is squirming and stuff, but like the front of the car is twisting and coming up and down, and you really notice what you're doing compared to, say, a BMW M2 or like a Nissan Z, the current Z, which have similar, I guess not similar, maybe in the neighborhood of the same horsepower, definitely in terms of torque, but not nearly the same kind of power delivery. Okay. So it has its own personality there. And the same when you're driving it, like it does have a lot of mechanical grip and the traction control and stability control systems are quite good.
Okay.
But it doesn't necessarily give you the kind of confidence that a traditional sports car would through the corners. Like you're probably going to get there and it's, you know, there might be a little bit of tail wag and whatnot and it's totally controllable. But it's not the same kind of planted feel that you would get from a sports car. And that's okay. Again, it's a different way to attack the same problem, which is how to have fun out on the road. And in this case, the Mustang decides you're going to have fun with pretty brutal power delivery and a little bit of floatiness, especially when you're cruising around, and a big muscled appearance. Like it's a big boned car. And all of that works together. I don't think the exterior styling is particularly successful on this generation, but it does have its own thing going, and that's to be applauded.
Okay. Do you think they're going to do the usual cadence of like Mustang special? I mean, we know there's a dark horse. Do you think there will be another boss or a Shelby or a Bullet?
I think that the dark horse is within a couple tenths of the last Shelby in terms of straight line performance.
The GT350?
No, the 500. I think it's close to what the 500 was. Yeah. And again, a lot of that is traction management. But a lot of that's traction management. I mean, it's just the technology is there to make the most use of power. I remember how scary the old Shelby GT500 was to drive?
I only remember, so you're gonna laugh at me because I only remember that I think it was 2011 or 2010, the one with like 600 horsepower.
Yeah, the one that like I got sideways on the front straight of Calabogie, like out of the blue.
I remember that one being quite a handful and really disturbing to drive on the road. Like it was really not, it felt like the road was not big enough for it at all times, right?
Yeah.
And then I also remember the Boss 302. Now that was a really impressive. To me, that was peak Mustang performance, track performance. I thought that was one of the coolest cars ever made. I thought it was just so unbelievably easy to have fun with and feel confident with on the track. And unfortunately, I haven't driven the Shelbys of the following generations, but I have driven a modern Mustang Bullet, and I thought that was also a lot of fun on the road too.
The GT350 was also really great, but the problem with that car was I knew someone who had one, and it was on his third engine. Like they just did not hold up well in terms of track use and track abuse, I think. But yeah, I agree with you on the Boss 302. It was really, at the time, it felt like a sports car and not a Mustang, which is a weird thing to say when we're in this world now where we have these incredible grip machines with all this technology that can pretty much match a sports car in terms of spec sheet, if not in terms of driving feel.
Right. Okay, one thing you haven't really talked to me about is whether or not, with all of this like advancement, this modernization of the Mustang, has the price tag increased to an uncomfortable level here?
Well, the GT starts at $43,000 now in the United States, and the one
you used to be able to get it for like what, 38?
I don't remember exactly, but I do remember there was at one point a $35,000 one. I mean, that was and now the one I had, the premium, is like $47,000. And once you add on delivery, you're probably looking at close to 50. Okay. That is a lot of money to spend on a muscle car. I think that it has basically created a situation where these cars used to be like the democratization of performance. Like a muscle car was something you could go out and buy because you couldn't afford the BMW or you couldn't afford the Porsche. But now they're almost priced on par with some of those rivals, and that's kind of
a good point. Yeah.
It has made it so that it's an elite vehicle now. I mean, I think that Ford has tried to make the EcoBoost what the old GT was. So the EcoBoost starts at $33,000 basically after delivery. And sure, it's got all of the, I said, 4.9 seconds to 60. That's faster than my CTS-V, or the same speed as my CTS-V. But the personality is dramatically different.
Right.
So it's like, are you buying it for the experience of ownership, or are you buying it for the numbers to impress people at a car meet, or what are you doing? I think Ford has really kind of split up the buyers as a result of that. They've kind of taken the old Mustang customer and divided it into as many narrow slices as they can, and then tried to market to those slices.
And this is the case. I mean, this is what's happening across the line. I mean, even the Camaro starts with a V8 starts at 38,000.
Well, the Camaro's dead. The Camaro's gone.
Yes. But the 2024, I assume you could probably still get a couple of them.
Yeah, you can't build them. If there's leftover inventory, you can still get them. But that's something I want to touch on in a second about what the Mustang means in the market. I just wanted to go back to pricing. In Canada, the EcoBoost starts at $40,000, and then the GT starts at $54,000. So it's a $14,000 gap. You compare that to the US, where the gap between the EcoBoost and the GT is only $10,000. So it's a little bit more of a jump, and then the premium fastback is like $60,000. But let me pull up the spec sheet on mine, and I can tell you exactly what it cost with delivery and everything.
Sure. It's also worth pointing out that other sports cars, even if they're not Mustangs, like muscle cars, like the Mustang or the Camaro, are equally expensive. I mean, the Supra is a $56,000 car. The Nissan Z is the bargain of the segment at $42,000. These things aren't cheap anymore,
Yeah, so mine was $60,000. I'm assuming that Ford is putting. It's weird because I'm looking at the website right now, and it's showing me that the GT Premium. Okay, I didn't have a premium. That's why I was mistaken.
Okay.
I had a fastback, so it started at 54, and my options were a Premier trim with color accent, and I think that's the colors and the stickers that I had on my car. I had the performance exhaust, which was $1,500. I had something called the Mustang Night Pony package, which is a black painted roof, black rims, and I'm assuming black somewhere else too. And there's a couple of other options. Like I got a spoiler. It's weird how like the sound system and the wedge spoiler and the brake calipers and the limited slip axle are all listed as options, but there's no charge for them. So the car, I think that comes with the equipment group that I ordered, the Premier trim. But I say that like I ordered it. I did not order it. Ford ordered it. It came to $61,000 plus $2,000 in shipping and handling. So $63,000 total, which is a lot of money for a Mustang. But there's no more Challenger. There's no more Camaro. If you want this car, it's the only one you can get. And Ford knows that. They can charge whatever they want for people who want a muscle car. That's the bottom line.
That hurts. I don't like it when they do that.
I know, Sami. It's personal. They aimed it at you.
It is. That really does hurt. I think it hurts the enthusiast passion as well. I think, I think the Mustang was one of those vehicles that was attainable to young people. And now I don't know if that's the case.
Absolutely not.
Well, I mean, maybe if you want that EcoBoost, right?
But I think
I don't think you want an EcoBoost.
The average vehicle transaction price in both countries, it hovers right around the price of a GT Premium or a GT.
That's not the fault of the buyers.
But what I'm saying is Ford's pricing is not out of line with the market, which is kind of pointing to just how crazy the market overall has become. And I think now that the BRZ and its ilk, and I guess maybe the Miata, although that's getting more and more expensive.
They're getting expensive too.
Yeah, you're going to have to go back to maybe compact performance cars have taken over for muscle cars like they've been threatening to do for 20 years.
Like the Elantra N and the Kona N
or even
the GTI.
Even something like a GTI or a WRX, so you don't have to go to like the top tier. But like those cars have remained somewhat affordable in a world where muscle cars are now priced to be the kind of car that your dad drives instead of the car that you drive.
Interesting.
Or your mom, or your uncle, or your aunt. Like it's the next generation that's being able to enjoy these cars.
That's fair. I want to talk about the next generation. I mean, is there anything else you want to talk about with this?
Yeah, to wrap it up, I liked the car. I found myself driving it more than I thought I would. I took it on some fun drives. Like I went out to go have a blast with it. And for the most part, I enjoyed it. I like the V8 sound. I think the exhaust system's done well. And it's surprisingly comfortable and useful for what it is, which again, I think speaks to the larger size of it in terms of comfort and just practicality. So I personally would not buy the car. I don't really like the styling that much. I think it's a little strange to look at these days, but I do think it's a successful vehicle and one that I enjoyed. That's, anytime I can have fun behind the wheel, that's a big plus in a world where we're constantly driving SUVs that are identical to each other in every conceivable way.
Yeah, I agree. It's wild. I want to talk about what's been going on in the automotive industry in the past week or so, but I want to start with some news that I think we've been hovering around for a little while, and that's with Ford and their electric vehicles strategy. Did you hear about the news that they've decided that they were making a 3-row electric SUV, and they have decided that's just not going to happen anymore?
What? No more? Like they're just like, no, sorry, no more EVs.
No, they're not going to make this electric 3-row. They apparently are going to make 2 electric pickup trucks that will arrive in 3 years.
Okay.
And an electric van,
Don't
cargo van. I
they
think
have an electric 3-row in Europe? Isn't there already an Explorer or an Expedition or something that's like Europe only? That's EV.
I think so, and I'm
I
not entirely sure. Let
I
me
thought
double check.
that's what was going to be imported over to here, and now I guess they just put the kibosh on that. I think I remember reading something where Ford said they wouldn't develop any more EVs unless they could be profitable within the first year.
That's what they said. That's exactly what they said.
So that kind of indicates to me that this is a company that is trying to, instead of building a market for its vehicles, is trying to either guess where the market is going or telling people what they should be buying. It just seems like an odd, instead of reading the tea leaves and seeing, okay, all the people who wanted to buy a $100,000 Lightning have bought their $100,000 Lightning. We need to build something for the next group of buyers that we haven't sold to. Instead of doing that, they're just kind of saying, oh, people don't want the Lightning? Well, you're not getting this 3-row.
We can't make any more money off this 3-row that we're making because we don't know how many people are going to buy it. And because I guess their expectations for the Lightning weren't met, maybe?
And meanwhile, well, I think perhaps they overloaded their expectations by devoting so much line space and marketing space and showroom space to the Lightning instead of making the Lightning part of an overall strategy or package. Like the Mach-E has been on the market for quite a while now, and I don't hear anything about a refresh or new trims or any kind of updates coming to it. And that's a little bit alarming to me. Like, why aren't we growing? The mistake I think Ford made was trying to grow from the Lightning up instead of from the Mach-E up. Or even the Mach-E down.
That's right. I mean, we talk about this all the time with the Bolt. That's what it did.
Yeah, and GM had this market and just walked away from it and said, no, thank you. We're not interested in selling thousands of cars to eagerly interested buyers.
It's tough. I don't get it. I mean, I'm gonna recite the words of the Hyundai Canada CEO at a recent interview, who said, "We have data that says that once a customer of theirs goes electric, there's a very low chance that they will go back to a gas car."
That's a big deal.
That's a huge deal. So if you start them off with a cheap EV,
like, they have this information. They're the ones who are coming up with this information.
Right. So I understand Hyundai actually makes Hyundai and Kia make a lot of electric vehicles for different price points. I don't think they yet have the super affordable EV that we're really
they
waiting
have the
for.
Kona EV that's like almost affordable.
Yeah, and same with Kia, who has like the Niro EV again, and Soul EV they had for a while. So I mean, if Ford took that information as well and said, they have the line, they have the production capabilities, they have the technology to go from a small car to a big one, that might work. Like, I don't get why they're just so they don't have the long-term plan.
No, it's not long-term planning. It's totally short-term profits. I mean, if we want to look at another company that's kind of in a similar position, kind of but different, Jeep has been talking about having a small off-road electric Jeep for how many years now?
Since I started this industry, I think.
So,
yeah,
it is a product that they've been teasing indefinitely, and so far all we've gotten from them in terms of full EV is like the full-size Wagoneer that's electric, and that's not even available yet.
The Wagoneer S, I think it's called.
Which is, I mean, confusing
and a very different vehicle than the Wagoneer, which is weird too.
Yeah,
so
they're still trying to make Wagoneer happen.
Ford says it's still committed to EVs and announced that a new low-cost platform will underpin multiple vehicles, but will eventually come with the first product on this platform in low-cost, whatever it is, will come in 2027.
Yeah, until
there's a lot of time for them to there's a lot of time for them to change their mind from now till then. And then they've decided that they're going to make a hybrid. They're going to focus on hybrid technology. They say that makes sense because battery costs in those segments are okay.
Okay, look. Ford did have a pretty good hybrid program for a long time. The Fusion,
C-Max.
They had C-Max. They had the plug-in Fusion. They had the hybrid Escape is pretty good. And then they wiped away all of those models. They just walked away.
Escape is still around.
Escape, yeah. But what I'm saying is, like, they walked away largely from the hybrid market. They now have Escape and they have F-150. Do they have another hybrid? I mean, we don't have the Aviator hybrids gone, right?
I believe so, yeah.
Is there still an Expedition hybrid? Or sorry, Explorer hybrid?
I don't think so.
So it's a schizophrenic approach. I don't mean to be ableist with that word, but it is a approach.
Yeah, it's very polarizing. They just go back and forth.
And to expect us to believe that they have an actual plan when they're really just bouncing back and forth, as you said, from one pole to the other, I don't understand. The bottom line is these companies are addicted to oil. They're addicted.
They're addicted to money. They want to make the. Yeah, okay.
Let me finish my point. Yeah. They're addicted to oil in the sense that Ford and General Motors and to a lesser extent Chrysler, all of their profits come from trucks, full-size trucks. As long as that is true, there is no real incentive for them to invest anywhere else. If they know they're going to sell 1 million F-150s a year, they do, or F-Series in total, they don't really have to worry about how many Mach-E's they're selling. And
that's fair.
The market has no incentive for these companies to change their minds. And that's why you have to have government incentives in order to force the market into a position that is uncomfortable with. The idea that a free market creates the best products for people is a false one, especially when you're talking about industries with the huge barriers to entry, like manufacturing.
Yeah.
Specifically industrial manufacturing and automotive manufacturing. I mean, if you look at the companies that have had success becoming car companies outside of the general mold, Tesla and Rivian, they have all produced small EVs because they do not have this built-in culture of, well, we're just going to have the same profit model that we've always had chugging along in the background. And the decisions we make for small EVs don't really matter to the bottom line.
And they have a long-term they believe they have a long-term forecast where they can plan for the future and build multiple products that will fill in white space and become, attractive.
Now, speaking of companies with no real long-term plan for EVs, there's another brand that has recently introduced or has made an announcement about a long-awaited electric vehicle of theirs, And we have problems with that too, don't we?
Yeah, I mean,
because
we're
we're just here complaining about electric cars today.
I mean, we complain about electric cars all the time because I think we get a lot of listeners who ask us about EVs or are tired of EVs because they think they're being shoved down their throats. And I think we've driven good EVs, we've driven bad EVs, and I think the real thing is that EVs to us have become overpriced, and that's a major part of why I think people are really turned off by them. It's one thing to be told you need to get on the EV train. It's another thing to be told you need to spend that much money to do so.
Yeah,
okay?
and so Volkswagen comes along.
Who's got I will call it an average EV in their lineup in North America, the ID.4, I believe it's called.
Yeah, there was going to be an ID.7, but they just decided not to bring it. It's similar to what they've done with the vehicle we're about to talk about, something that was announced years ago, something that's been available in Europe for quite a while.
So much hype. This is the ID.Buzz.
This is the retro one, right? It looks like the old bus.
Or a minivan, a bus or microvan or whatever you want to call it.
Sammy, how is this not a slam dunk?
Because
everyone loves the bus.
It hasn't come to America despite, I think, being promised for about 2 or 3 years.
Now, if you're Volkswagen and you don't have a history of slam dunk products in North America, wouldn't you be so excited and working super hard to get this onto the streets as soon as you could?
Yeah, I think so. I think the major issue is it wasn't being built here. And is instead built in Germany, and I think that increases the cost or the logistics of getting an electric vehicle. Yes,
perhaps a federal incentive that should be removed in order to facilitate EV adoption. But anyway,
but we did get news that the car is coming apparently later this year. Again, assuming Volkswagen doesn't change their mind
at the last minute, which is what they're good at.
And it has a starting price of $61,545 in the US, and that is for as far as I understand, a rear-wheel drive version of the vehicle.
Sammy, that's too much money.
That's almost $62,000 for, let me get this right, 234 miles of range.
Okay.
And 282 horsepower.
Now,
what I am looking at looks like a 3-row vehicle with a large battery, a 91 kilowatt hour battery. And here we are, man.
And here's the problem. There's 2 major problems with that approach from Volkswagen. The first is those stats would have been acceptable 3 years ago when this vehicle was initially announced and went on sale. At this point, they're no longer impressive. In fact, they're kind of the low side of average, I would say.
Yep, absolutely.
The other problem Volkswagen has is you can get a Kia EV9, which is a good-looking 3-row EV, for $54,900. I'm not saying that's the one you would buy, but that's the starting price. Already the starting price is like $7,000 less than what Volkswagen is asking. And I
gotta double check this EV9, the specs on this EV9, because $55,000, I think you still gets you a decent chunk of range.
Well, I'm saying it's a rear-wheel drive vehicle, which is what the Volkswagen is.
Yep.
And it's considerably cheaper. And you're
230 miles. That's comparable to 234 miles.
For sure. So Volkswagen is overpriced without over-delivering. And I don't know if they're counting entirely on the styling of the bus to sell it. Mm-hmm. But it feels like a bad idea. And don't get me wrong. You could buy expensive versions of the EV9. There's like a $75,000 version of that vehicle. Yep. But it's all-wheel drive and it has a bunch of luxury stuff. So, I mean...
Yeah, where are we? What are we doing?
Is it set up to fail? Is that what's happening here? Or is it just incompetence? Or I'm not saying incompetence is...
Or is it like we're looking at Ford where they're saying the only way this car makes sense is for us to make some money on it somehow, and the only way they can make money off of it is to overprice it for whatever it is, and that's just not going to impress people,
That could very well be it. And is
it selling a car better than not selling a car?
But the problem with a vehicle like the Buzz is that they know that they have a built-in market of like Volkswagen fanatics who've been waiting for a bus-like return for, 40 or 50 years. Mm-hmm. And they know they can sell to those people. So once you have that, the temptation, I think, for product planners and executives is to milk it as much as they can. The car companies always lead with the highest trim possible.
Yeah.
Just to maximize profits on delivery upon initial
and early adopters. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a dangerous strategy when you're introducing an all-new vehicle, because if you come to the market with a vehicle everyone's excited about and half your potential customers show up in the showroom and realize, I can't afford this, you've got to get them to show up a second time now. Whereas before you basically threw away that momentum, that excitement. It's gone. So that's a cost, a very real cost for these car companies to be facing.
I totally agree with you. I want to change gears very quickly and talk about one of my favorite annual events. Huh?
No lift shift?
No lift shift, yes. I want to talk about one of my favorite annual events, which is the Monterey Car Week, also formerly known as, I think, the Pebble Beach Concours d'Elegance or whatever it is. But although concourses are a bit of a weird thing altogether, and the amount of auctions and the money that's spent during these weeks of high rolling is kind of off-putting in some circles.
You can't get enough. I mean, don't try to hide the truth.
I really love seeing some of these really cool cars that are announced during this week. And this year, there's been some pretty cool cars. I mean, there's a new version of the Lincoln Navigator, which was announced. It's not like a significant redesign, but come on, the Navigator is a Lincoln staple. It's basically it's the flagship of the Lincoln name, right?
I mean, yeah, I'm interested in driving it because I find the generations from Lincoln, you never know what you're gonna get. Like sometimes they're just very average, and sometimes they're extremely impressive. And I hope that it's not like a back and forth thing, and that this one continues to build on the momentum of the previous version of the vehicle.
It has the same. I believe it has the same powertrain, but it can come with a 48-inch widescreen display. It comes with 24-inch wheels. I think it's just basically copying the playbook of the Cadillac Escalade, to be blunt,
and the IQ, which is I believe on market very soon, the electric version of the Escalade.
Yeah. So yeah. I mean, navigators are cool. They're you don't see a lot of them because I think the Escalade has a little bit more cachet, but I don't think the Navigator is that far off. There's also a new Lamborghini. I love talking about Lamborghinis. Okay, I'll just talk quick about it. It's called the Temerario, and features a 907 horsepower plug-in hybrid V8. This is interesting because the V10 is gone. And the V10 was really popular with the past Lamborghinis. And I'm looking forward to seeing how this vehicle turns out, because it's got tons of horsepower. It's got 0 to 60 acceleration in about 2.5 seconds, which is brilliant. And then there was one more weird story that caught my eye, is that there's going to be a Maybach version of the Mercedes SL. It's called the Mercedes-Mayback SL 680 Monogram Series.
Yeah, I saw pictures of it. Like every other Maybach, it's quite awkward.
Yeah. I wanted to talk about this because the SL changed this generation. It changed significantly this generation, because I believe the SL used to be marketed as a cruiser and developed as a cruiser. And I think this version of the SL was instead built with the AMG mindset.
Well, I think it got a lot bigger too in terms of weight. Like, isn't it a much more massive vehicle?
Yeah, it's huge. So this Maybach, though, doesn't have rear seats.
Well, the SL has never had rear seats.
I thought the SL had rear seats.
No, it's a Roadster.
That's okay.
It's been a Roadster for a very long time.
Well, the current one has rear seats.
The current Mercedes SL has rear seats?
I believe so. I'm looking at pictures of it.
Because the previous generation did it?
No, I thought the SL had rear seats.
Because,
Are we losing our minds?
No, we're not losing our minds. Here's what's happened. SL has referred to like multiple product lines from Mercedes-Benz over the last 30 years. So you had there used to be a coupe version of the S-Class that was called the SEC, but I think that in the 90s, the SEC became like the SL or the S-Class Coupe or something like that. And then the SL was the Roadster version, but you could also get the SLC, which was the smaller
the
Roadster.
SLC is a small one. It used to be called the SLK.
Because I know in the 80s when we had the SLs, like the very popular square one, that did not have a back seat.
I don't think so.
And then in the 90s, when they had the SLs, that did not have a back seat either.
the Silver Arrows or whatever they're called.
No, not the Silver Arrows, just like the squared off SL 500, SL 600. Yeah. No back seat there. Next generation after that, there was no back seat either. And then once you get to like 2011, I get fuzzy. I don't know. Okay. I don't know where the back seats are.
Well, I believe you can get a back seat in the current generation SL, but not the Maybach.
You know why?
Tell me.
Because that's where the luxury is. They had to make room for the luxury, so they got rid of the rear seats.
So that's the thing that catches me off guard with this. I mean, it changes, I think, the character of what a Mercedes is. And I don't know if a Maybach can be like appropriately applied to an SL.
It does seem like an odd thing because all the previous ones have been like sedans or SUVs.
Yeah. And are huge. I mean,
did you know that Mercedes was losing $300,000 per vehicle on the initial development, the initial generation of Maybachs in the 2000s?
300,000?
The 57s and the 62s.
Those were ridiculous cars.
Yeah, they were completely non-profitable vehicles, and that's why a big part of why. I mean, they never caught on.
And they took a break, I guess. The name, right?
Well, what happened was when I think they were introduced in 2002. The concepts came out in like late 90s. Then the production models in like 2002, and then Mercedes realized no one cared about the Maybach as a standalone vehicle, so they kind of forgot about it, and it stayed on sale for a while, but they kept upgrading like the S-Class and forgetting about the Maybach. So you got to a weird point in time in like 2007 where you had a new S-Class that had way more technology and power and whatnot than the Maybachs did, but it was priced at like, I don't know, 20% of what a Maybach would cost you. And then they finally put the Maybach out of its misery. And a few years later, they resurrected it as the trim level that we're kind of seeing today. They made those like Pullman versions of the S-Class. Yeah. And they made the Maybach versions. And they realized that people would pay a little bit more to get some exclusivity on top of an existing product line. And that's where we are today, 10 years later.
Now, one of the things I want to mention mainly about this vehicle is I think it's supposed to go up against, I think the SL in particular is supposed to go up against something like the a Lexus LC, which is a very popular car with critics and journalists. I don't know if it's selling particularly well. I don't know if this will ever sell very well, but I think going to the Maybach line and losing the rear seats might be an interesting move for them there.
I mean, it's a super low volume car, right?
That's fair.
That's the bottom line.
Now, I want to take a quick tangent. While we're talking about these vehicles and the history of these ultra luxury coupes, can I talk to you about this car that I've always had like eyes for, called the Mercedes CL class? Do you know the CL class, which is basically a two-door version of the S class?
Yeah, like so I said, the S class coupe from the 90s became the CL class in the early 2000s.
I love this car. I always love this car. It's one of the and I see them on the used car market for so little for what they are.
Especially the V12s. You can get them for like $6,000 or something.
And you're always like, should I? And then common sense kicks in and it's like, no, that thing will be a headache.
Yeah, it's a $150,000 car that has $150,000 headaches and maintenance issues. That's unfortunately the reality of these cheap cars. The guy who's selling it to you has already taken out a second mortgage, and the airbags are always popped, and it's like low to the ground, and
I always
I think they look good though. I agree with you.
They're the slickest car. They're so like they're wicked. I love them, I will never have one.
Did they make a CL65 back in that era?
I liked them back in the 90s, the late 90s to the mid 2000s.
Well, because I remember when AMG came out with that turbocharged V12. I remember reading a story where one of the magazines took it to a drag strip, and in the first pass, they ran like an 11-second run or something, or like a sub 11 seconds, and the drag strip got mad at them because they didn't have a roll bar or like a helmet or anything. And
so the first Hellcat issue, I suppose.
The driver had legitimately never been to a drag strip before and managed this incredibly impressive performance because they had something like 738 pound-feet of torque. And in that era, we're used to it now with Hellcats and stuff, but in that era, that was an insane number. That was like a number you expected you would associate with like an 18-wheeler when it came to torque. And now
they're wild. I mean, I'm looking at their torque on like you said, the twin turbo V12, 738 pound-feet of torque. That's wild. Like, that's insane, right?
It's totally crazy. And like right now in my driveway, I have a pickup truck that has 975 pound-feet of torque.
Anyways,
mind blowing.
I love these cars. If anybody has had some experience with these cars and wants to share your experience, positive or negative, I'd love to hear them. I think the easiest way to get in touch with us, and if you don't want to talk about CLs, that's fine too. You can talk about whatever you want to us. Tell me. Just head on over to our website, unnamedautomotivepodcast.com. There's a contact form there. You fill it out and it lands in our inbox. Or if you want, you can email us the old-fashioned way. It's benjamin@benjaminhunting.com. Or you can reach out to us on social media. We prefer the filter-flavored world of Instagram. I'm at Sami_hi, like you're laughing, but more likely you'll want to get in touch with Ben because he's just so much more engaging and social than I am. He's at Hunting Benjamin.
I don't know. He sleeps a lot these days. I don't know how engaging and social he is.
And what else are we going to talk about? Head on over our website. Subscribe to our podcast. Tell your friends.
Leave a review. Yeah, honestly, word of mouth's the single best thing. If you have a friend who likes cars or likes silliness, be like, hey, there's this podcast I think you might like, and hit them up with our information, or leave a review on whatever service you are using to listen to us, because that helps other people find us. Sami, what are we going to be talking about next week?
I haven't even looked at what I've got booked next week.
Start with a Z and end with an X?
No, that's 2 weeks away. You're giving it away, man. You want me in this ZDX so bad.
Yeah.
What are you driving?
I'm going to be talking about I kind of let it slip earlier, but the 2025 GMC Sierra 2500 HD AT4X AEV 6.6 liter turbo diesel V8. That is legitimately the description of the vehicles that I will be talking about. I'm going to be using it to tow my race car to Watkins Glen. It has a towing capacity of 18,500 pounds, which is conservatively 5 times what I need it to be to get there and back. So it will be an interesting experience.
I can't wait to hear about it. I think a good tow story makes for a great podcast.
You love a good. You're always. Sometimes Sami texts me at like 11:30. He's like, Ben, I can't sleep. Hit me up with a good tow story. Do you have a good tow story? And then he's out like a light. It's cute actually. But yeah.
Yeah. There's no lie there. I think that's exactly what happens, and I really appreciate it. Although I'll try to stay awake for this one.
It's okay. I mean, I really only have the beginnings of a good tow story. So
that's all I need.
Your timing, your unconsciousness, it's impeccably timed.
Thanks, everyone, for listening. We'll talk to you next week.
Bye.
Bye.